When I got fired, not one member of my family stepped in to help. Instead, they told me, handle it on your own. I kept quiet. A year later, at a gala I organized, their faces dropped seeing I was the owner behind the sponsoring company. What would you do if the people you loved most, your family, watched you drown and then scoffed at your attempts to swim? I thought family meant unconditional love, a safety net. But I learned the hard way that sometimes the ones closest to you are the very people who will betray you, laugh in your face, and even try to bury you alive. And I promise you, their betrayal wasn't the end of me. It was just the brutal beginning of everything. My name is Noah, I'm 27, and a year ago, I discovered what family really means. Or rather, what it absolutely doesn't. Growing up, you just assume family is your unbreakable safety net, the ones who catch you when you fall. At least, that's what I believed. I always saw myself as the dependable one, the quiet son who kept his head down, worked hard, and never asked for much. I was the guy who helped my sister move into her first house, who stayed up till midnight editing resumes for my cousins, who never hesitated to lend a few $100 when someone just needed to make rent. I genuinely thought that kind of loyalty was a two-way street. Turns out, I was spectacularly wrong. The day I lost my job felt like the ground had been ripped right out from under me. I'd poured almost 5 years of my life into that mid-sized marketing agency, slowly building myself up, doing everything right. Then, one morning, my manager called me into her office with this look on her face, a look I'll never forget. She started with corporate buzzwords like restructuring and budget cuts, insisting it wasn't about my performance. But the brutal reality was simple. I was out. One small box of belongings, a quick, awkward exit past coworkers who couldn't even meet my eyes. And just like that, my entire world shifted. I remember gripping that cardboard box in the elevator, a desperate thought clinging to me. It's okay. I've always been there for my family. Now it's my turn. They'll have my back. That was the desperate lie I told myself when I first broke the news to my parents. Their reaction was muted, to say the very least. My dad leaned back in his chair and just casually said, "Well, that's the economy for you. You'll figure it out." My mom just nodded, as if she was more concerned about the roast in the oven than the fact her son had no income, no future. My sister, Leah, chimed in with, "Maybe this will teach you not to rely on one company. Should have had a side hustle." She said it so casually, so dismissively, as if I hadn't just lost the job that paid my rent and bought my groceries. And my brother, Ethan? He laughed. Actually laughed, and muttered something about how I'd finally get a taste of real life. That one stung the most. Ethan had never held a job for more than a few months, yet somehow he always had money. He was the family's golden child, the one who always got bailed out whenever his reckless spending caught up to him. I tried not to let their reactions sink too deep. I told myself it was just shock, that they didn't realize how serious my situation was. But as days bled into weeks, the crushing truth became impossible to ignore. Not one of them offered help. Not a couch to crash on, not a loan, not even a kind, encouraging word. When I finally mustered the courage to ask my dad if he could spot me a bit for groceries, he sighed, a deep, exasperated sound, like I was asking him for a down payment on a house. "You're an adult, Noah," he lectured. "Adults handle their own problems. Don't come running to us every time life gets hard." Every time? As if I'd done this before. As if I hadn't spent years quietly holding everyone else together. I remember one particular night when things truly hit rock bottom. I was sitting in my dim apartment, staring at my dwindling bank account on my laptop screen. Rent was coming up, and I had absolutely nothing. I called Leah, desperately hoping maybe she'd finally see how desperate I was. "Leah," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "I'm really struggling. I don't even know if I can make rent this month." She didn't hesitate. "That's not my problem, Noah. You've got 2 hands, don't you? Go get another job or sell something. People hustle every day." Then she hung up. Just like that. My own sister. The one I'd literally lent money to 2 years earlier when she was short on her mortgage, couldn't even pretend to care. The worst part wasn't even the financial struggle. It was the crushing silence. The way my family carried on like nothing had happened. We'd have Sunday dinners, and not one single person would ask how my job search was going. Instead, they'd brag about Ethan's new motorcycle or Leah's latest promotion. And there I was, pushing food around my plate, trying not to choke on the bitterness building inside me. I wanted to scream, "Don't you see me drowning here?" But I didn't. I stayed silent, swallowing my anger like poison. As months dragged on, I applied to hundreds of jobs. Some days, I'd wake up with a little flicker of hope, thinking, maybe today's the day. Other days, I could barely get out of bed. Depression crept in, wrapping around me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. And every time I thought about reaching out to my family again, I remembered their cold words, "Figure it out yourself." That became the brutal mantra they'd shoved down my throat. So I did. I figured it out myself. But not in the way they expected. The first glimmer of change, the first tiny crack in the suffocating wall around me, came when an old college friend, Marcus, called me out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in years, but he remembered I'd been good with strategy and branding back in school. He was starting a business and desperately needed someone to help with marketing. "I can't pay much right now," he admitted honestly. "But if this thing grows, you'll be part of it from the ground up." I almost cried when he offered. Not because of the money, it was barely enough to scrape by, but because someone believed in me when my own family clearly didn't. I said yes. That small yes became the opening I needed. I threw myself into the work, pouring every ounce of energy into Marcus' startup. I stayed up late, learned new tools, experimented with campaigns. Slowly, the company began to take shape. We signed a few clients, then a few more. The trickle of income turned into a steady stream, and for the first time in months, I felt alive again. But I didn't tell my family. Not yet. I wanted them to believe I was still struggling, still invisible. Because deep down, a seed had been planted, a seed called revenge. I'd sit at family dinners, nodding along as Ethan bragged about some new gadget Mom and Dad had bought him, while secretly knowing I was building something bigger than any of them could imagine. Every dismissive comment they made, every cold shoulder they gave me, became pure, unadulterated fuel. They had written me off, and I was going to make damn sure they regretted it. Not with yelling or begging for recognition. No. My revenge would be quiet, patient, and absolutely unforgettable. And that brings me to the night everything began to truly shift. The night that would plant the final, critical piece of the puzzle. It was my father's birthday dinner, a gathering. At a fancy restaurant he insisted we all attend. I almost didn't go, but something told me I needed to be there. We sat around a long table, my siblings laughing, my parents toasting, and me, silent as usual. Then Ethan leaned across the table with that smug smirk of his. "So, Noah," he drawled, "still unemployed? Or did you finally manage to get hired at a grocery store?" Everyone chuckled. Even my dad. I forced a smile, but inside I burned. That was the precise moment I realized exactly how I'd play this game. I wouldn't just rebuild my life. I'd outgrow them so completely that when they finally looked up, they wouldn't even recognize the man standing in front of them. I decided right then and there, the next chapter of my life wouldn't be about surviving. It would be about becoming untouchable. The weeks after that dinner at the fancy restaurant stuck to me like a bitter aftertaste I couldn't shake. Every word Ethan had said replayed in my head. His smug tone. The way my dad laughed at the jab. How my mom didn't even blink. I sat there smiling, but the laughter had felt like knives. It was one thing to be ignored, another entirely to be mocked for simply trying to survive. That was the moment I stopped seeing them as my family. They weren't my support system. They were spectators, waiting for me to fail and applauding when I did. The rising tension wasn't just in my head. It began creeping into every interaction I had with them. My parents held Sunday dinners like they were royal banquets. Everyone invited, except it was less about genuine family connection and more about putting on a show of togetherness. They wanted to maintain appearances, wanted neighbors and extended relatives to see us as this perfectly close-knit family. Yet, behind the smiles and clinking glasses, there was a quiet, insidious rot. The favoritism was obvious, though it had been there all along. I'd just ignored it before. Ethan, the golden boy, got everything handed to him. My dad bragged about helping him with a business venture that, from what I knew, was nothing more than another excuse for him to burn through money on flashy toys and half-baked ideas. Leah, the responsible one in their eyes, was showered with praise every time she so much as mentioned a project at work. Meanwhile, I sat at the same table, invisible, like a prop they hadn't figured out how to remove yet. One evening, when bills were stacking higher than I wanted to admit, I decided to swallow my pride and ask my mom for help one last time. I didn't want much, just enough to cover rent until Marcus' startup paid me that month. I caught her in the kitchen after dinner when it was just the two of us. "Mom," I said, carefully, "I'm in a tight spot. I'll pay you back in a month, I promise. Could you help me with a little?" She cut me off before I even finished. "Noah, we can't keep enabling you. You're grown. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet." Her tone was sharp, almost rehearsed, like she'd been waiting for me to ask just so she could deliver that line. It wasn't even about the money. It was about her twisted principle that helping me was weakness, while helping Ethan or Leah was an investment. I wanted to remind her of the countless times I'd bailed Leah out, of the nights I'd driven Ethan home when he was too drunk to stand, of the years I'd been the reliable one. But I bit my tongue. That night, I went home and ate rice with canned beans, reminding myself that this silence, this brutal patience, was going to pay off. The favoritism reached its breaking point a few weeks later. My parents hosted a family night at their house where they announced, with great ceremony, that they'd co-signed a loan for Ethan so he could expand his opportunities. My dad made it sound noble, like Ethan was on the cusp of greatness, when everyone knew he was just buying another car. When I finally asked, a tiny flicker of defiance in my voice, didn't Ethan already get help last month? My dad shot me a look so sharp I felt it in my bones. Don't be jealous, Noah. Your brother is ambitious. We believe in him. The word jealous lodged itself in my chest like a shard of glass. They truly believed my frustration was envy, not a desperate cry for fairness. Leah nodded in agreement, like she was the judge stamping the verdict. Nobody asked me what I was working on, how Marcus' company was going, if I was making any progress. To them, I wasn't ambitious. I was lazy, weak, forgettable. Things worsened when Leah threw a small party for her promotion. I went, partly because Marcus and I had just landed our first real client and I thought maybe, just maybe, it was worth sharing a bit of good news. When I mentioned it casually to Leah, she laughed. So, you're freelancing now? That's not a career, Noah. That's just scrambling to survive. Her friends giggled along, and I felt the familiar burn in my chest. I excused myself early that night, leaving the laughter behind, and walked out into the cold air, thinking, they'll eat those words one day. By this point, every family gathering felt like a performance, and I was always cast as the fool. My dad loved to ask in front of relatives, so Noah, any luck finding real work yet? That word, real, stung more than he knew. It dismissed everything I was building, everything I was pouring myself into. I'd smile politely, answer vaguely, and sit there while cousins and aunts pitted me, never knowing the truth. The manipulation wasn't just in the words. It was in the constant reminders that I was an outsider in my own family. Mom once asked me to babysit Leah's kids so she could go shopping with her. When I hesitated because I had meetings lined up for Marcus' startup, she frowned. So now you're too busy to help your sister? She's always been there for you. I wanted to laugh at the sheer irony, but instead I agreed, rescheduling my work quietly. They still thought I was unemployed, so my time, my effort, meant absolutely nothing to them. Even Ethan got in on it. One night after another family dinner, he pulled me aside in the driveway. Look, Noah, he said, smirking, maybe it's time you accept that not everyone's cut out for success. Some people just coast through life, and that's fine, but stop dragging us into your pity party. We got things going on. Then he patted my shoulder, like he was doing me a favor, and walked off to his shiny new car, bought with my parents' help. That night, I sat in my car and stared at the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Every word, every dismissive gesture, every moment of being brushed aside was fuel. I thought back to Marcus, to the small office we were building together, to the contracts we were signing. They didn't know it yet, but I wasn't the one coasting through life. I was climbing, inch by agonizing inch, while they looked down at me, convinced I was buried. The tension had reached a boiling point, and I could feel something fundamental shifting inside me. The more they pushed me down, the stronger my resolve became. I stopped seeking their approval. I stopped waiting for their support. I decided in those quiet, lonely nights that one day they would sit in a room and realize who I had become. And it would be too late to take back all the times they laughed, all the times they turned their backs. The stage was set. I was invisible to them. And that invisibility gave me power. They had no idea I was building something that would soon cast a shadow over everything they thought they knew. And then came the moment that cracked the foundation entirely. A gathering that changed the way I looked at them forever. It was a Saturday in late spring when the ultimate betrayal happened. The kind of day where the air feels heavy with change, though you can't quite name why. I woke up to a message in the family group chat, family barbecue at Leah's house tonight. Everyone's invited. My first instinct was to ignore it, but then I thought, maybe, just maybe, this would be a chance to patch things up. A foolish part of me still wanted to believe that they could see me as more than just a disappointment. When I arrived, the backyard was buzzing. Kids ran around the grass, smoke drifted from the grill, and laughter spilled out onto the patio. I greeted Leah, who was holding a glass of wine. Her face lit up with that self-satisfied glow she always carried at her own parties. "Glad you made it," she said, though her tone made it sound more like an obligation than a welcome. At first, the evening was uneventful. I stayed quiet, sipping a soda, listening to Ethan boast about his latest venture while my dad nodded along proudly. It was the same old pattern, but I was used to it. Then, halfway through dinner, my mom clinked her fork against her glass. "Everyone, can I have your attention for a moment?" she said, smiling warmly. Conversations hushed, and I glanced up, curious. She stood next to Ethan, her hand on his shoulder. "Your father and I have been discussing this for a while now, and we've decided to help Ethan with something big. We believe in his vision, and we want to support his future. So, we're giving him the down payment for a house." The words hit me like a physical punch. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. A down payment for Ethan, the brother who'd never held a steady job, who burned through every chance they gave him. I looked around the table, waiting for someone to react, for someone to say, "What about Noah?" But no one did. Instead, there was clapping, cheering, toasts being raised. Ethan grinned smugly, already talking about the neighborhood he wanted. I sat frozen, my fork hovering in midair. A house. I was scraping pennies together just to keep a roof over my head. And they were handing him a future on a silver platter. My chest tightened, a sickening mixture of anger, hurt, and complete betrayal bubbling inside me. I couldn't even swallow the food in my mouth. It turned to ash. Leah leaned across the table toward me, lowering her voice just enough so only I could hear. "Don't take it personally, Noah. You're just not as reliable with money. They know Ethan will make something of himself." She said it so casually, as if she hadn't just driven a knife straight into me. Not as reliable. I wanted to laugh, scream, break something. I had spent years budgeting every single cent, working long hours, helping them without ever asking for repayment. Ethan, the so-called reliable one, had never managed more than a few months without their direct intervention. And yet, here I was, being told I wasn't trustworthy enough. After the announcement, Dad made a point of turning toward me. "Noah, I hope you're not upset. This isn't about playing favorites. It's about investing where it makes sense. You'll understand one day." His voice was calm, paternal, like he was delivering some great life lesson. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. That night, the barbecue blurred together. I barely tasted the food, barely heard the conversations around me. All I could hear was the echoing phrase, investing where it makes sense, as if my life, my worth, wasn't even worth considering for investment. When the evening wound down, I tried to slip out quietly, but Ethan stopped me by the driveway. He leaned against his car, smirking. "Tough break, huh? Don't be too bitter, little brother. Not everyone's cut out for success. Some of us just attract opportunities." He laughed, slapped my back, and strolled away like he hadn't just crushed me underfoot. I sat in my car for nearly an hour after that, hands trembling on the steering wheel, staring at the glow of Leah's house. I kept thinking back to all the years I had carried this family in small, unseen ways. And for what? To be discarded, ignored, betrayed. That night, something inside me broke. But in breaking, it hardened. The pain twisted into pure, unyielding resolve. I realized I was done chasing scraps of approval. I was done hoping they'd finally see me. They never would, but they would feel my absence, my success, my cold, silent transformation. I went home and poured every ounce of that anger, that deep, simmering hurt, into work. Marcus Startup wasn't just a job anymore. It became my escape, my salvation, my weapon. Every campaign I built, every client we signed, felt like laying bricks in a fortress that would one day stand so tall they couldn't possibly ignore it. The betrayal at that barbecue was more than a slap in the face. It was the turning point. The undeniable moment I knew my family didn't just undervalue me. They didn't value me at all. And from that night forward, I stopped trying to belong to them. But fate, it turns out, has a way of twisting the knife even deeper. And just when I thought I'd reached the peak of betrayal, they proved me wrong. After that barbecue, I honestly thought I'd already hit rock bottom. Watching Ethan celebrated like a conquering hero while I sat invisible at the same table felt like the lowest point of my life. But life has a way of showing you that low always has one more step down. The weeks after were suffocating. I'd sit in my dim apartment staring at overdue notices on the counter, wondering if I'd be able to hang on just one more month. Marcus Startup was still young, and though we had promise, cash flow was unpredictable. Some weeks were good, others felt like scraping coins out of couch cushions. I skipped meals, learned the taste of ramen and stale bread by heart, and kept my lights dim to save on the bill. My bank account became a battlefield. Every small purchase, another wound I couldn't afford. And still, my family acted like I didn't exist. Not once did they check in. No text asking if I was okay. No knock on the door to see if I needed anything. The only time I heard from them was when they needed something from me. Leah called one afternoon, her tone brisk, almost irritated. "Noah, I need you to babysit Saturday. You're not working, right?" I hesitated. I had 3 crucial client calls lined up that day, ones I absolutely couldn't afford to miss. "I've got things scheduled," I said carefully. She sighed dramatically, like I was being incredibly selfish. "Come on, it's not like you're busy with a real job. Don't make this hard. I'm counting on you." Something inside me wanted to shout, to finally say no, but I caved. I rescheduled my calls, made excuses to clients, and showed up at her house. When I arrived, she barely looked at me, just tossed a list of instructions on the counter, and walked out the door without even a thank you. I spent that night on her couch while her kids slept, staring at the ceiling, realizing I was nothing more than a tool to them, a placeholder, someone to use when convenient. Then came the final straw. Rent was due again, and I had barely scraped together enough. I went to my dad, not for money. I was done asking, but for advice. I wanted to believe maybe there was still some part of him that saw me as his son, not just a disappointment. We sat in his study, shelves lined with leather-bound books he never read. I told him about Marcus' startup, about how hard we were working, about the potential I saw in it. I thought if I could show him that I was building something real, he'd at least give me encouragement. When I finished, he leaned back, steepled his fingers, and said, "Noah, I think it's time you faced reality. These little ventures, these pipe dreams, they're not going to lead anywhere. You should cut your losses and get a job that actually pays. Stop embarrassing yourself." Embarrassing? That word carved itself into me like stone. He didn't just doubt me. He was ashamed of me. I nodded, pretending to accept his words, but inside, I felt something vital die. That was the moment I stopped looking for their approval for good. I walked out of his study, out of that house, and didn't look back. The days that followed were the darkest of my life. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down. Depression clung to me, whispering that maybe my dad was right. Maybe I was chasing something that would never come. Every failure, every rejection email, every dismissive laugh from my family piled onto me like bricks. I felt crushed, suffocated. And yet, in that crushing silence, something small, almost imperceptible, began to grow. A tiny, resilient seed. I realized that if I kept waiting for them to see me, I'd simply wither away. They would never come around, never clap for me, never stand in my corner. If I wanted a future, I had to build it myself. Not to prove them wrong, but to free myself from needing them at all. So, I started planning. Quietly, methodically. Every night while the world slept, I'd sit at my desk with Marcus on video calls, mapping strategies, learning new skills, reaching out to clients. I built routines, tracked progress, created goals. I stopped showing up to family dinners. When my mom called asking why, I told her I was busy. She scoffed, but I didn't explain. I realized that walking away didn't have to be loud. It could be silent, subtle, the kind of absence that wasn't noticed until it was far, far too late. I was withdrawing from their world brick by painstaking brick, until one day they would look around and realize I wasn't there anymore. It hurt. God, it hurt to accept that I was truly, completely on my own. But in that searing pain, I felt something shift. Rock bottom wasn't just where I suffered. It was where I stopped waiting for them to save me. It was where I finally picked up the hammer and started building the ladder to climb out myself. Still, I had no idea just how much higher I'd rise, or how much they'd come to regret every word, every dismissal, every single betrayal. And it all started with one unexpected opportunity that practically fell into my lap, the spark that lit the fire I'd been waiting to unleash. The shift started quietly, almost invisibly, like the first hints of dawn seeping over the horizon. I was still living frugally, still keeping my head down, but Marcus' startup began to change shape before my very eyes. We landed a mid-sized client in the tech sector, a company desperate to rebrand and get noticed in a crowded market. I poured every ounce of myself into that campaign, long nights designing ads, drafting copy, experimenting with strategies I'd never dared try before. When the campaign went live, the results were staggering. Website traffic tripled in a week. Social media buzz exploded. Our client sent us a personal thank you note saying it was the best quarter they'd ever had. Marcus forwarded it to me with a single line: "This is only the beginning." For the first time in months, I felt something I'd almost forgotten. Hope. Real, tangible hope. We used that success to pitch new clients, and one by one, doors started to open. Small businesses, startups, even a couple of regional companies looking to expand. The money wasn't pouring in yet, but it was steady, consistent, enough for me to pay rent on time, enough to fill my fridge with more than rice and beans, enough to simply breathe. But the real change wasn't just financial. It was deep inside me. I found myself walking taller, speaking with more confidence, trusting my instincts. Each victory was a stark reminder that my family's voices, the ones telling me I was lazy, a failure, and embarrassment, were all lies. Lies I had swallowed for far too long. Now I was replacing them with proof. Proof that I was capable, resourceful, relentless. Marcus noticed it too. One evening, after a long day of meetings, he said, "Noah, you've got a mind for this. I can't imagine this company without you. We should talk about equity." Equity. That word changed everything. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a partner, an owner. I wasn't just scraping by. I was building something that would one day stand tall. I kept it all hidden from my family. When they called, I gave vague answers. When they asked if I was still unemployed, I just nodded along, letting them think I was barely surviving. The truth became my secret weapon. Their dismissiveness fueled me, and the stark contrast between what they thought I was and what I was becoming made the fire burn even hotter. I stopped attending family dinners entirely. At first, they noticed. My mom left me voicemails saying, "Noah, stop isolating yourself. We're worried." But I knew better. They weren't worried. They were annoyed I wasn't there to fill the pathetic role they'd cast me in. Soon, the calls stopped and the silence grew. That silence gave me space. Space to work, to grow, to rise. Then came the turning point. One of our clients, a chain of boutique hotels, was so incredibly impressed with our work that they introduced us to their investors. Suddenly, Marcus and I were sitting in meetings with people who had real money, real influence. I still remember the moment we walked into that sleek office, the city skyline glittering behind the windows, and pitched our vision. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in a room I once would have thought was completely out of reach. The investors were cautious, but intrigued. They didn't write us a check on the spot, but they opened doors, introduced us to others, and within 6 months, we had secured funding. Real funding. Enough to hire a small team, move out of Marcus' cramped apartment, and into an actual office with our name on the door. I'll never forget walking into that office for the first time. The smell of fresh paint, the hum of computers, the sound of people working for us. It wasn't just a company anymore. It was a force. And I wasn't just Noah, the invisible son, the overlooked brother. I was Noah, co-founder, strategist, leader. I still kept quiet. My family didn't know. They thought I was barely getting by, maybe working odd jobs, scraping together rent. That's what made it so much sweeter. I wanted them to underestimate me, to dismiss me. Because when the moment came, when the curtain finally lifted, the look on their faces would be worth every sleepless night. In the meantime, I started taking better care of myself. I bought clothes that fit well, learned how to carry myself with quiet authority. I started going to the gym, not for vanity, but because I desperately needed the discipline, the structure. Every rep, every drop of sweat felt like shedding the skin of the old me, the one who begged for scraps of approval. The money came slowly at first, but it grew steadily. Enough to build savings, then enough to upgrade my beat-up car, then enough to consider moving into a place that didn't feel like a shoebox. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't post about it. I stayed in the shadows, letting my success grow in profound silence. But life has a way of circling back, and soon my family's world and mine would collide again. It started with an invitation, an event I hadn't expected, one that would force me to step back into their orbit, carrying a truth they weren't prepared to see. That night, I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting my suit jacket, realizing for the first time in years that I didn't just look different, I was different. And I was about to step into a room where the people who doubted me most would finally, undeniably see it. The invitation arrived in a thick, cream envelope, sealed with gold foil lettering that almost seemed to mock me. It was addressed to Mr. Noah Clark, and when I opened it, I had to read it twice. The annual business and philanthropy gala hosted by the Albright Foundation. Black tie, open bar, silent auction. A night for the city's elite to sip champagne, shake hands, and flaunt their influence under twinkling chandeliers. At first, I almost tossed it aside. Why would someone like me, at least the version of me my family still believed in, receive an invitation to an event like this? Then Marcus explained, our hotel client is sponsoring part of the event. They want us there as their marketing team. It's networking gold, Noah. The kind of people you'll want to meet. It hit me then. This was bigger than just another night of business cards and polite conversation. This was entry into a whole new world. A world where my family's dismissive laughter and cruel words simply didn't matter, because here, I wasn't the failure son. I was a co-founder, a strategist, someone with growing influence. I didn't tell them, of course. When my mom texted me that week asking if I was still struggling to find work, I simply replied, keeping busy. Nothing new. The less they knew, the better. The night of the gala, I stood in front of my mirror, fastening the cufflinks I'd bought with my first real bonus. My suit was sharp, perfectly tailored, not extravagant, but enough to make me feel like I belonged. As I adjusted my tie, I thought about the boy who once sat in his dim apartment, shivering under the weight of unpaid bills. That boy still lived inside me, but tonight, he had armor. The ballroom glowed with crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors, and the soft murmur of voices blending with the faint, elegant notes of a string quartet. Marcus and I checked in, and almost immediately, we were ushered toward a circle of people who controlled more money than I'd ever dreamed of: investors, executives, philanthropists. And for the first time, I wasn't nervous. I spoke with confidence, pitched ideas smoothly, and watched as people nodded, not with condescension, but with genuine respect. Halfway through the night, something happened that shifted everything. One of the event coordinators pulled Marcus and me aside, beaming. The sponsors are thrilled with your work. We'd like to feature your company more prominently at next year's gala. In fact, if you're interested, you could come on board as co-sponsors yourselves. Marcus' eyes lit up, and I felt my chest tighten. Sponsorship wasn't just a business opportunity. It was visibility. Our name on the banners, our logo on the programs, our presence tied to the city's most prestigious event. It was legitimacy carved in stone. And then it hit me like a lightning strike. My family would be there. Of course they would. My dad's company always donated to the foundation, and Leah never missed a chance to rub shoulders with people she thought were important. Ethan? He'd probably be on the arm of some woman, boasting about money that wasn't even his. The thought made my pulse quicken. I pictured them walking into that ballroom, expecting the same invisible Noah they'd written off, and instead, seeing me standing under banners with my company's name, shaking hands with people they couldn't even dream of meeting. The image was intoxicating. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into preparation. Marcus handled logistics, but I worked on presence. I built our portfolio, sharpened our messaging, made damn sure that when the spotlight hit us, we'd be ready. Quietly, behind the scenes, I began crafting something else, too. An opportunity. A way to not just attend the gala, but to make sure that when my family saw me, it wouldn't be in passing. It would be unforgettable. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the setup was perfect. They had always dismissed me in private, mocked me behind closed doors. But here, at a public event where status mattered more than anything, they would have no choice but to face what I had become. Their cruelty, their betrayal, it would hang heavy in the air when they realized the boy they had cast aside was the man standing at the very center of the room. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. Taking back the dignity they'd stripped from me. Not with shouts or accusations, but with success so undeniable it would utterly silence them. And yet, even as I planned, there was a tiny, trembling part of me. What if they tried to diminish me again? What if they twisted this into just another reason to belittle me? Then I remembered the night of the barbecue, the word embarrassing echoing in my ears. That was the fuel. That was the fire. So I prepared. I worked late into the nights, refining presentations, strategizing, ensuring that when the gala came, I wouldn't just be another face in a tuxedo. I would be the face they could not ignore. The night of the event arrived faster than I expected. I stood once again in front of my mirror, dressed sharper than ever, my company's badge pinned discreetly to my lapel. My reflection stared back at me. Not the Noah they'd abandoned, but the Noah they'd soon regret. Underestimating. I didn't know exactly how the night would unfold. But one thing was certain. When my family walked into that ballroom, they would finally see me. Not as the failure they mocked, but as the man they could never control. And the moment was closer than I thought. The night of the gala shimmered like something out of a movie. The ballroom glowed with warm, golden light. Waiters glided between tables with trays of champagne, and a string quartet played something soft in the background. My heart was steady. Not racing, not nervous. It felt almost calm, like I'd been rehearsing this moment my entire life. Marcus and I arrived early, making sure everything with our company's display was perfect. Our logo, polished and clean, was featured on the tall banners that flanked the stage. It was printed on the programs, embossed on the thank you cards, and even etched into the digital presentations projected around the room. Nobody could miss it. I was mingling with a small group of executives when I saw them enter. My parents first, Dad in a stiff suit, Mom in a glittering dress. Leah followed, holding her husband's arm, her smile wide and practiced. And Ethan, of course, trailed behind, already laughing too loudly, acting like the room belonged to him. I watched them for a moment, unseen in the crowd, as they scanned the ballroom. My mother's eyes flicked over the decorations, and I caught the small frown when she noticed the name on the banners. She tugged on my father's sleeve, whispering something. He turned to look, and his brow furrowed. I smiled to myself. The first crack had appeared. I didn't approach them immediately. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I let the night unfold. As the gala moved into full swing, I positioned myself exactly where I needed to be. Close to the sponsors, close to the stage, always within sight of the logo that bore my company's name. Every time I shook hands, every time someone introduced me as Noah Clark, co-founder of, I made sure my family was close enough to hear. The first real blow landed during the silent auction. The host took the stage, thanking the sponsors. "We want to extend a special appreciation," he announced, his voice booming, "to our newest partner, Clark and Rivers Marketing. Their incredible support and vision made tonight possible." Polite applause rippled through the room, but I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at my parents, at Leah, at Ethan. Their forced smiles had vanished. My father's hand tightened on his glass, his knuckles white. Leah's lips parted slightly, eyes wide, as if she couldn't reconcile the name on the banner with the brother she'd dismissed as a failure. Ethan leaned in, whispering something sharp to my mother, but she didn't answer. I felt no need to gloat. I simply stood, nodded graciously when the host gestured to me, and returned to my conversation with the investors at my table, calm, controlled. The silence from my family was louder than any outburst could have been. Later in the evening, fate handed me the perfect stage. One of the hotel executives we'd worked with insisted on introducing me personally to a cluster of influential donors. "This young man is a genius," he said loudly, his hand resting on my shoulder. "He's the reason our rebrand was such a success. His company doesn't just market businesses, they transform them." Again, polite laughter and admiration. And again, I didn't boast. I smiled, shook hands, and replied modestly, "We've been fortunate to work with some great clients." But as I glanced over, I caught Ethan staring at me, his jaw tight, his earlier smugness utterly drained away. The moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction came near the very end of the night. My father, unable to resist appearances any longer, finally approached me. He walked slowly, like the ground was uncertain beneath his feet. "Noah," he said, his voice carefully controlled, we didn't realize you were involved in this event." I turned to face him fully, meeting his eyes without flinching. "Yes," I said evenly. "My company is one of the sponsors." There it was. The acknowledgement. The undeniable truth hanging heavy between us. For the first time, he had no script, no patronizing lesson, no dismissive laugh. Just silence. I didn't linger. I didn't offer him comfort. I let the weight of that silence settle on him, then excused myself politely to join another group of executives. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on me. My parents, Leah, Ethan, all of them watching, processing, finally realizing this wasn't the brother they could mock. This wasn't the son they could dismiss. This was a man they no longer understood. A man who had built something without them, despite them. And the beauty of it was that I hadn't yelled, hadn't boasted, hadn't rubbed it in their faces. I had simply let the truth shine in a room where truth couldn't be ignored. By the end of the night, I didn't need revenge delivered in words or actions. The revenge was in the way their smiles faltered. In the way their confidence cracked. In the way they finally saw me, not as the shadow they cast aside, but as someone standing taller than they'd ever expected. And yet, as satisfying as it was, I knew the night wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the fallout. Because once you show people who underestimated you what you've become, they can't help but scramble to reclaim what they lost. And I was more than ready for that. The days after the gala were strangely quiet. No calls, no messages, no sudden invitations to family dinners. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I had taken the upper hand. Not by shouting, not by fighting, but by standing still while they finally saw what I had built. I half expected my phone to explode with excuses, attempts to rewrite history, or sudden bursts of, "We're so proud of you." But instead, there was silence. A silence so heavy it almost made me laugh. Then slowly, the fallout began. Leah was the first to crack. She showed up at my office unannounced one afternoon, standing awkwardly in the lobby while my assistant asked if I wanted to see her. I agreed, out of curiosity more than anything. When she stepped into my office and saw the polished furniture, the framed contracts on the wall, the quiet hum of a growing business, her jaw tightened. "Noah," she began, her voice sharp but coated with forced sweetness. "You should have told us. We had no idea you were doing all this." I leaned back in my chair, calm. "You never asked." Her face faltered just for a second. Then she launched into her real reason for being there. Her husband's company was struggling, and she thought, maybe we could collaborate? Maybe I could extend a professional courtesy. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. This was the same sister who told me freelancing wasn't a real career. I gave her a polite smile. "I'll think about it," I said, already knowing I wouldn't. Next came my parents. My mom called first, her voice suddenly warm, dripping with maternal pride. "Noah, we're so proud of you. Your father and I always knew you had potential. We just wanted to push you to be stronger. That's all." The lie was so transparent, it almost hurt to hear. They weren't proud. They were afraid. Afraid of losing access, afraid of being left behind. When my dad finally spoke to me, it was in that same study where he once told me I was an embarrassment. Only this time, his tone had shifted. "Noah, I think we got off on the wrong foot. We didn't mean to undervalue you. We just didn't see the full picture." I met his eyes and let the silence stretch until he grew uncomfortable. Then I said, very clearly, "You saw enough. You just chose not to look." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. For the first time in my life, my father had no lecture, no condescension, just silence. And Ethan, oh Ethan. He tried to laugh it off, to pretend none of it mattered. At the next family gathering I reluctantly attended, he swaggered up to me with a glass of wine. "So, little brother's a big shot now, huh? Guess you got lucky." I didn't rise to the bait. I just looked at him and said, "Funny thing about luck, Ethan, it looks a lot like hard work when you're not paying attention." The smirk slid right off his face, and he walked away without another word. From that moment on, the dynamic shifted entirely. Family dinners weren't the same. They tried to pull me back into the fold, tried to act like I'd always been one of them, but it was too late. I wasn't hungry for their approval anymore. I wasn't desperate for scraps of attention. I had my own table now, my own family in the form of the incredible people I worked alongside every day, building something real. As months turned into a year, my company's name grew louder in the city. We expanded, took on bigger clients, and became one of the fastest growing firms in the region. Meanwhile, my family's pedestal cracked. Ethan's ventures collapsed one after another, leaving him with debt he couldn't climb out of. Leah's husband's business dissolved, and she began calling me with thinly veiled pleas for help. My parents, once the picture of control and authority, grew quieter, older, shadows of the people who once lorded their power over me. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I simply kept moving forward, letting my silence speak louder than any words ever could. One evening, nearly a year to the day after that first gala, I found myself back in that same ballroom. This time as a headlining sponsor. The banners with my company's name stretched higher. The applause was louder. And when I looked out into the glittering crowd, I saw them again. My parents, Leah, Ethan, all sitting at one of the back tables, their faces tight, forced smiles plastered on. They weren't guests of honor anymore. They were spectators. As the host introduced me to give a short speech, I walked onto the stage and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, my gaze lingered on them, and I remembered every word, every dismissal, every time they told me to figure it out yourself. So I did. I gave my speech, simple and steady, about resilience, about the power of building something from nothing. I never mentioned them directly, but every word was laced with the truth they couldn't escape. When the applause thundered and I stepped down, I knew the revenge was complete. Not because they suffered, but because I no longer needed them to see me. As I left the stage, I caught my father's eyes one last time. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I simply nodded once and walked past him, the sound of applause still echoing behind me. That was the final line in the story they wrote for me. They had cast me as the failure, the embarrassment, the forgotten son. But I had rewritten the ending. And this time, the last page was undeniably mine. Have you ever faced a moment where the people you expected to support you instead became your biggest critics? Or maybe even your betrayers? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. What would you have done in my place?